Chapter 6, The Descent into Oblivion. The door slammed behind her, the howling wind whipping her hair across her tear-streaked face. The night was thick and oppressive, the scent of rain heavy in the air as Alex Orakeen stumbled through the darkness, her hands still slick with her husband's blood. Every step she took was like wading through a nightmare, her mind fractured into shards of guilt, rage, and something far worse, satisfaction. But even as she fled, she could still hear the cries of her children, their innocent voices begging for her to come back. For a moment, she stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from her chest. She wanted to keep running, to put miles between her and the carnage she had left behind, to escape the consequences of the monster she had unleashed. But the darkness was not finished with her yet. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever, a chorus of cruel voices that sliced through her thoughts. You can't leave loose ends, Alex. You know what happens if they find out. Your children, they're witnesses. They'll grow up and tell the world who you really are. The thought of her children, her beautiful twins, turning against her, condemning her to the world, it was unbearable. She had already destroyed her husband, the one person who had truly loved her despite all her flaws. She couldn't bear the idea of her children living in a world where their mother was a murderer. She turned on her heel, her resolve hardening like steel. The darkness within her was a ravenous beast, and it would not be satisfied until it consumed everything she had ever cared about. Her children's cries were growing louder, more frantic, as she approached their bedroom door. The house was eerily silent, save for the soft sobs coming from behind the closed door. She could almost hear their tiny hearts beating in terror, the way they must be huddled together under the covers, clutching each other for comfort. Alex stood outside the door for a moment, her breath ragged, her mind racing. You don't have to do this, a small, desperate voice whispered. You can stop now. Just leave, disappear, let them live. But it was too late. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. The darkness was in control now, a cruel puppet master pulling her strings. Pushing the door open, she stepped inside. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight shaped like a smiling moon, casting long shadows across the walls. The twins were curled up on the bed, their eyes wide and red-rimmed with tears. Mommy, her daughter's voice was a shaky whisper, full of a hope that was about to be cruelly shattered. Alex's throat tightened, but she forced herself to smile, to appear as calm as possible. It's okay, babies, she cooed softly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Mommy just needs you to be quiet, alright? Everything's going to be okay. But it was a lie. She had already chosen their fate. Before they could scream, before they could even process the danger, Alex lunged forward. She was efficient, merciless, driven by a cold detachment that numbed the screams and the desperate, thrashing struggles of her children. She pressed a pillow over their faces, tears streaming down her cheeks even as she held it there, ignoring the way their small bodies jerked and spasmed beneath her. The room was filled with the muffled sounds of gasping, choked breaths, and then, silence. The darkness that had always been a part of her, the same darkness she had tried so hard to cage, finally settled into a satisfied hush. Alex stared down at their lifeless bodies, her hands shaking. She had become the monster she always feared she was. There was no going back now. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, drowning her in a sea of despair. She collapsed to her knees, letting out a silent scream that seemed to echo through the hollow, empty house. But she couldn't afford to fall apart, not yet. The clock was ticking, and if she stayed here, the authorities would find her, would expose everything. She needed to disappear completely, to erase every trace of her existence. Dragging herself back to her feet, Alex moved like a machine, driven purely by the need to survive. She wrapped the bodies of her children in plastic sheets, their tiny faces hidden beneath layers of thick black plastic. They had been everything to her once, the reason she had tried to change, to be better. But now, they were just loose ends. She hauled their bodies down into the basement, where she had kept the supplies for a life she had never imagined she would need again. She poured the acid into a large, metal barrel, watching as the corrosive liquid hissed and bubbled. One by one, she lowered the bodies into the acid, her hands steady, her mind blank. The acid began to eat away at the flesh, a grotesque symphony of sizzling and popping. The smell was almost unbearable, but Alex was past the point of caring. By the time she was finished, there was nothing left but a sludgy, viscous pool at the bottom of the barrel. She wiped her hands on a rag, her mind already racing with the next steps. She had to disappear, to vanish without a trace. America was no longer safe for her. She needed to go somewhere far away, somewhere no one would ever think to look for her. Ghana. She had heard stories of its bustling markets, its hidden alleyways, the kind of place where someone like her could get lost forever. It was perfect. With a fake passport she had stashed away for emergencies, Alex fled into the night. She moved like a shadow through the darkened streets, her heart pounding as she boarded a late-night flight bound for Accra. The plane roared to life, and as it lifted off the ground, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. She was leaving everything behind, the bodies, the blood, the ghosts that would haunt her forever. But as the city lights of America faded into the distance, she knew one thing for certain. No matter where she went, no matter how far she ran, the darkness would always be with her.